The little town woke slowly each morning. The bakery across the square would begin releasing the warm, yeasty scent of bread. And shutters creaked open one by one as people greeted the day. Among these ordinary rhythms, there was one presence everyone had come to recognize. The brown stray dog that lingered near the old sewer grate. She wasn't an extraordinary-looking animal. Her fur was a mix of earth tones, patches of deep chestnut, sandy beige, and streaks of gray along her back that hinted at hard years lived on the streets. Her ears, one bent and the other standing tall, gave her a lopsided charm. Despite her rough appearance, her eyes were bright. Amber pools that carried something beyond hunger or the instinct for survival. They carried intention. Every morning, as the first bus rumbled past and the milkman clinked bottles onto doorsteps, she would pad quietly along the cobblestones. She rarely stopped to greet anyone, even the children who sometimes tried to pet her, though she never snapped or growled. Instead, her paws led her with unwavering certainty to the same spot, the round, rusted manhole cover in the middle of the street. Once there, she would lower her head, sniffing the edges with quick, restless breaths. Then she would settle into position, pressing her muzzle against the cold metal slits as though trying to breathe in whatever lay below. Some mornings she whined softly, a thin, almost pleading sound. Other days she merely sat, her tail curled neatly around her legs, watching, listening, waiting. At first, townspeople thought little of it. Strays are odd creatures, muttered the grocer, unloading crates of apples. She probably smells food scraps down there. Children guessed it was a game. That maybe she was chasing invisible rats or playing pretend. An old woman who fed pigeons near the fountain shook her head and whispered, "No, she's guarding something. Look how she refuses to leave." Indeed, that was the strangest part. No matter the weather, whether the sun beat down and heated the iron cover until it shimmered, or whether rain poured and turned the street into a river of mud, the dog returned. She never missed a morning, nor an evening. Some nights she could even be spotted curled up nearby, sleeping lightly, her body positioned so she could leap up at the slightest sound from below. Her ritual drew quiet attention. People paused on their way to work to glance at her. Some shaking their heads, others exchanging puzzled remarks. Even travelers passing through noticed. One man took a photograph and joked that the dog was guarding treasure. Another, less light-hearted, remarked that perhaps someone had been lost down there long ago. But through all the speculation, the dog remained silent, steadfast in her strange vigil. She seemed not to care for scraps tossed her way, nor for the occasional pat on the head. Her loyalty was fixed downward, beneath the iron barrier, to the unseen world of shadows and echoes. Little by little, what began as a curiosity turned into something more unsettling. Why would an animal devote itself so fiercely to an empty sewer? And what, if anything, was calling her back each day? At first, people dismissed the dog's strange behavior as nothing more than instinct. Dogs sniff things, garbage, rats, food, and the sewers certainly held no shortage of smells. But as the days turned into weeks, the animal's persistence began to trouble the townsfolk. She wasn't simply sniffing. She was waiting, watching, guarding. Every morning, no matter who passed by, there she was, sitting beside the same manhole cover as though it were the front door to her home. Her eyes never strayed far from the narrow slits in the metal. Sometimes she would paw at the cover, her claws scraping with a sharp, desperate sound that made people glance over their shoulders. Other times, she lowered herself to the ground, nose pressed flat to the surface, ears twitching, as though listening for whispers from beneath the street. The children were the first to grow fascinated. On their way to school, they would gather in a circle, pointing and whispering. "She's listening for monsters," one boy declared. "Or maybe ghosts," said another, clutching her friend's hand with mock fear. The dog ignored their giggles, tail thumping once or twice. But her gaze never wavered from the grate. Soon adults began to notice as well. The baker leaned in his doorway each morning, wiping flour from his hands, and muttered to a customer, "Strange thing, that dog. Never saw loyalty like it, not for a sewer. The grocer, who prided himself on being practical, shook his head. Probably just rats. Big ones, maybe. She's hungry, that's all. Yet even he had to admit that the dog didn't behave like she was hunting. She wasn't restless or frantic. She was patient, almost reverent. Curiosity spread through the town like a quiet rumor. What could possibly be down there that held her so spellbound? The more people tried to explain it away, the less sense it made. One man tried to shoo her off with claps and whistles. But she returned within minutes. Another, thinking she must be starving, left half a loaf of bread beside her. She devoured it gratefully, but afterward, she went straight back to her vigil, pressing her head against the metal. There was something unsettling about the persistence. Dogs might return to a place if food was hidden there, or if they had been mistreated and were seeking refuge. But to return to the same spot day after day, with eyes that seemed almost sorrowful, it stirred an unease that no one could quite shake. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the street in orange light, an elderly woman named Marta paused beside the dog. She had lived in the town her whole life and had seen strays come and go, most forgotten quickly. But this one was different. Marta bent down, resting a trembling hand on the dog's rough fur. The animal looked up at her only briefly, then lowered her head again toward the grate. Marta frowned. "You're not waiting for food," she whispered. "You're waiting for someone." The words clung to her, and soon they clung to others. Each day, more townsfolk lingered at the corner, watching the animal perform her silent ritual. Their curiosity grew sharper, tinged with unease, until it finally gave way to something else, the need to know what lay beneath that manhole. The decision to open the manhole was not made lightly. For weeks, the dog's devotion had been little more than a curiosity, the subject of gossip in shops and quiet speculation at dinner tables. But as her vigil stretched on, day after day, the town's unease deepened into a need for answers. By now, people no longer walked past without pausing. The dog had made the sewer cover into a stage, and the audience kept growing. One crisp morning, when the air carried the smell of rain and chimney smoke, a small crowd gathered around her. The animal was performing her usual ritual, sniffing the rim of the iron cover, scratching it lightly, then settling with her nose pressed close, as though she could breathe life from whatever lay below. Children clutched their parents' hands, staring wide-eyed. Adults exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, someone spoke. "We should see what's down there." It was Tomas, the butcher. A practical man with strong arms and little patience for mysteries. "If it's just rats or scraps, we'll know. If not, well, at least we'll have peace of mind." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. A few men fetched tools, a crowbar from the mechanic's shop, heavy gloves, a lantern borrowed from the grocer's storeroom. The dog watched intently, her ears twitching, tail rising slightly with anticipation. It was as if she understood that her long vigil was about to be answered. When Tomas knelt beside the manhole, the dog gave a sharp bark that startled the children. She pawed frantically at the cover as though urging him on. "Easy, girl," Tomas muttered, steadying his grip on the rusted edge. With a grunt, he wedged the crowbar beneath the lip and pushed. Metal groaned, scraping against stone. The cover resisted, stubborn from years of neglect. Sweat beaded his brow as two others joined him, adding their strength. At last, with a loud metallic crack, the heavy lid shifted. A gust of damp air escaped, smelling of earth, mold, and rust. The crowd leaned back instinctively, some covering their noses. The dog, however, surged forward, pressing her face into the opening, and whining with such urgency that it sent chills down spines. "Bring the lantern," Marta said softly, her voice trembling. She stood at the front of the group, clutching her shawl tightly. The grocer handed the lantern down to Tomas, who lowered it into the dark hole. The light flickered, illuminating the narrow tunnel of concrete and brick. For a moment, all they saw were shadows, slick walls, and stagnant water glistening at the bottom. Then came a sound, faint but unmistakable. A whimper. Thin, high-pitched, fragile. The crowd froze. Mothers instinctively held their children closer. Men exchanged uneasy glances. Marta's hand flew to her mouth. The butcher leaned lower, straining to hear again. There it was, a tiny cry, followed by the scraping shuffle of something alive. The dog barked again, sharp and insistent. Her whole body trembling with urgency. She lunged toward the opening, restrained only by a firm hand from one of the men. Her message was clear: something is down there. Something that matters. And in that moment, the crowd realized the truth. They were not staring into an empty sewer. They were staring into a mystery that pulsed with life the moment the faint whimper rose from the darkness. A hush fell over the crowd. The sound was too soft to be mistaken for a rat. Too tender to be dismissed as some trick of the wind. It was the cry of something fragile, something alive, and something in need. The dog pressed closer, whining desperately. Her body trembling with both hope and fear. Her eyes darted between the people and the open manhole, as if pleading with them to understand. She barked once, then twice. Sharp cries that echoed down the street like commands: hurry! Save them! Tomas, the butcher, swallowed hard and lowered himself carefully into the hole, the lantern swinging in his hand. The damp air grew heavier with every step down the rusty ladder. Shadows stretched and twisted on the slimy brick walls. His boots splashed into shallow water at the bottom. And the sound of the whimper grew clearer. Quiet, everyone, Marta whispered above, clutching her shawl. The street fell silent. All eyes were fixed on the narrow circle of light where Tomas descended. The lantern swung, and at first there was nothing, only murky puddles, scraps of debris, and the echo of dripping water. Then, in a corner of the tunnel, something small shifted. A pair of tiny, frightened eyes reflected the glow. Tomas froze. "It's a pup," he called softly, his voice breaking. "A puppy." Gasps rose from the crowd. The dog above let out a long, mournful howl that made spines shiver. She pawed at the edge of the hole, desperate to reach her baby. Carefully, Tomas approached. The little creature was wedged between a broken pipe and a pile of wet rags, shivering violently. Its fur was matted, its ribs thin, but it was alive. When Tomas stretched out his hand, the puppy whimpered again, too weak to resist. Gently, he scooped it into his arms, cradling it against his chest. "Bring them up," someone shouted. Step by step, Tomas climbed the ladder, holding the lantern with one hand and the trembling bundle in the other. The crowd leaned forward, their breath held. And then, he emerged. In his arms lay the tiny, shivering puppy, eyes squeezed shut against the light. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Marta gasped aloud, and the dog leapt forward, nearly knocking Tomas off balance. She nuzzled her pup frantically, whining with joy, licking its face as if to assure herself it was real. The puppy let out a faint squeak, snuggling into her fur. Tears welled in the eyes of those watching. Hardened men wiped at their faces. Mothers clutched their children closer. What they were witnessing was not simply a rescue, it was devotion made visible. The triumph of a mother's love that had endured hunger, cold, and fear. "She never gave up," Marta whispered, her voice trembling. "She stayed here every day. For this." The dog curled protectively around her pup, tail wagging weakly, as if the world beyond the sewer no longer mattered. For her, the vigil was over. She had her baby back. The townsfolk stood in silence, humbled. None of them would ever forget the sight of the stray who had looked faithfully into the darkness and waited until light and love found their way back to her.